Welcome to the For Love and Money podcast, the show where business and social purpose meet to inspire a movement for positive change. Here's your host, Carolyn Butler-Madden.
Hello and welcome. I'm recording this episode on Guyamaigal and Garigal country, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. If you want to lead an organisation with purpose, to inspire people to believe in something bigger, to influence change, to build a real movement, there is one skill that underpins all of it: communication. And yet it's often the thing leaders invest in last, if at all. What if the world's most powerful communication training wasn't coming from a business school, but from Australia's most celebrated performing arts institution? That's exactly the idea behind NIDA corporate training, and my guest today is the woman leading it. Terri Martin is head of corporate at NIDA, the National Institute of Dramatic Art, where she oversees a business unit that has spent 30 years taking the stagecraft techniques taught to Australia's greatest performing artists and putting them to work in boardrooms, leadership teams and organisations across the country. Terri's career has spanned promotional marketing, advertising, not-for-profit and education, always at the intersection of business and creativity. She's a Marketing Academy alumna, a passionate mentor to young women, and someone who brings hard-won commercial acumen to everything she does. But here's what I find most compelling about Terri's story. She arrived at this work not just as a business leader, but as someone who had personally experienced the fear of presenting and the silence that can follow when no one helps you through it. That personal history gives her a very different kind of authority on why communication matters and why so many leaders are still not getting it right. In this conversation, we get into the surprising science of how we actually communicate and why your words they're almost beside the point. We talk about presence, the power of the pause, why the best communicators are often the best listeners, and what it takes for an entire organisation to literally speak the same language. This episode will resonate with anyone who leads people, influences decisions, or has ever stood in front of a room and wondered whether they're landing it. But I think it will have the most value for those leaders who want to lead with higher purpose, because communication is the skill that turns vision into a movement of change. Let's get into it. Terri, welcome to the For Love and Money podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. It's really great to be here. Thanks.
So the first question is one I ask every guest, and really keen to hear your view on this. Is there a role for love in business, do you think?
I really like that question. I think my first gut was to go, oh my goodness, when you think about corporations and capitalism, is to absolutely not say that there's love there. But I actually disagree with that thought that just came into my head. Yes, but love is different for every person. And so you can have people who love what their organisation do, love to give back. You can have people who love their colleagues. You can have people who love doing spreadsheets as part of their role. I think what's more worrying is when people don't love something. I think that's when you have to be worried, or is it just the love of the money? Then that's, I think, those kind of extremes are when I think there's caution. But you need people to love parts of what they do or what the company does or how we give back, or, I think that's how we thrive. That's when you get really great work done.
Yeah, love, passion brings energy. Interestingly, when you say love of money, I was thinking that would bring energy too. Is there a role for that?
Yeah.
Maybe there is.
No, actually, sorry, you are right, because I think the role I play, the role I have at my organisation is we are revenue driving department for our organisation. So yes, I do like that we hit the money. I think when it's perhaps personally motivated. So sometimes when you see these very, very, very senior leaders of ASICs companies who make decisions because I know it's going to affect their shares or, dividends and things like that. So I think, or bonuses, sorry, I think that's when it can be a problem, when it's very self-motivating.
Yeah, or when it's all consuming.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. When that's the only thing they're thinking about, is that kind of thing. Because, yes, if you can balance that with, we're trying to get the money, which is ultimately, the name of the game in most organisations, not all, that's good, but it's got to be kind of balanced with some other love of other areas as well.
Yeah.
Love of the people, love of the customer, love of the service we offer, love of the product, things like that.
Yeah. And I think that balancing act is really important, because even if you have someone who loves, the impact that they want to have in the world, their love of people or, planet or humanity drives that. If they don't see the bigger picture and the, opportunity to balance in a business organization, purpose and profit, that also becomes a problem.
Oh, you know what? You're absolutely right, because a lot of NFPs can have really passionate, caring people in them who care sometimes because of personal reasons, but then aren't always as commercially minded, and that can be at odds as well. So, yeah, I think it's love's you've got to have a little bit of love for everything within your role. It's okay to not love some areas, but I think, there's got to be balance. 100%.
Love that. Terri, take us back. So keen to understand what shaped your journey to bringing you to where you are today in enhancing communication, presentation, and leadership skills.
Look, I did a Bachelor of Business with a double major in marketing and management with absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. And I fell into it. It was an ad that I applied for a role in a promotional marketing agency called Chapman and Lester, that's now called The Marketing Store. And I loved the creativity around that. I didn't know that was something I loved, but, we were doing promotions with Friends. We were doing promotions with Shaq O'Neal. We were doing stuff that was really the Olympics. It was exciting, and I really loved it. And a really interesting thing happened to me when I worked there. So we were pitching on Arnott's, and I was 21, straight out of uni. I don't recall doing a lot of presenting at school or uni, and I think I always did it with palm cards, so you really had something to lean on. But I was asked to present as part of a group to Arnott's all these ideas for promotional marketing for their next year. It was a really important pitch, and I was given this slide. I think it was 2 slides to go through. I had no context. Didn't really understand enough about what we did. Sure, I could, say the words that were on the screen. I learnt them off. I got in front. I got it was my turn. I got up in front of everybody, and my voice just totally gave away, and I couldn't stop it. And no one stepped in, and no one said anything, and I just had to present with my voice like wavering. It was horrendous. It was a really distressing experience, and no one said anything to me afterwards either.
Oh, wow.
Which I think these days you just know that you couldn't leave things unsaid. But I then went for years and years and years just deflecting and just saying, someone else can present. That's okay. I don't need to present. And it's what you can get around if you do. And I've actually met lots of people who've done this in their career, where they've had even more senior people where they've gone, I hate presenting. I just want to be behind. And so they'll always push people forward. And I do think it gets to a point in your career where it's disadvantage. And I think that, if you want to push forward and you want to be seen and you want to be heard, you do have to solve that. But anyway, we'll park that because I think that's really interesting to where I am now. But I then went to the UK. I worked for Nickelodeon for 4 years, which was amazing. We were the #1 kids TV channel at the time. We'd have the Spice Girls coming in. I worked in marketing and sponsorship and promotions. So I really started to get a sense of the idea of brands working together to benefit each other. Mm-hmm. So that was something I got quite early on, actually in my promotional marketing experience as well, is that, brands would pay other brands money, to be represented with or around or on their brand so that, they could make more sales. And I really loved that. I've always loved partnerships and really great brands. I came back to Australia and then I got back into promotional marketing and then had children, helped my husband in his business, And then when they got a little bit older, I went into advertising, which was very cutthroat. And I probably admit I didn't love, because it was very intense, a lot of work, and then, the ad's on for 6 weeks and it's gone. And I didn't love that. And also you couldn't necessarily measure its impact, which I know why that is, and I understand all that. But it was a lot of work, a lot of stress, short time, and didn't seem to have much payoff. That's what it felt like to me. I moved into a presentation design agency, and I really loved that. I really started to get the power that presentations can have on individuals and their careers, and also the organisations in which they were representing. And I worked up, while I was there, actually, I got a place on the Marketing Academy, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's kind of a 9-month mentoring, coaching and learning journey.
Life-changing, I believe.
Yes, it is, 100%. And then I ended up actually going back to my organisation saying, we need a general manager and it needs to be me. And my boss was like, okay. So there you go.
Love that.
You should ask, because sometimes you will get. And when I got into general management, I'd come from account service where I was working with clients, the conduit between the clients and kind of everyone else. When I got into general management, I loved it. I loved being able to see all the different little things that make an organisation run, whether it's HR, IT, strategy, finance, whatever that was. I loved it, and really kind of knew that was where I was meant to be, was running businesses and having kind of that oversight rather than, being siloed and being in one part. After about 6 years there, I really started to rethink what I could do. I guess I was getting a little tired of kind of procurement who were coming back saying we need it faster and cheaper. And I'd spent so many years with, building really great relationships with my clients, only to be told, by someone whose KPIs were different to what my clients were, to what ours were. And I probably got to a time where I was like, I'd like to do something that feels a little better. I went on to be general manager of Dimmick's Children's Charities, so that was my first kind of foray into the not-for-profit sector. I then went on to be director of corporate services for a $25 million not-for-profit, which was Youth Off the Streets.
Wow.
Which was really, really interesting. That was during COVID, so they had to make cuts to the team, and it was kind of last in, first out. So me and some of my colleagues had to move on. I then ran an education marketing agency, which was really interesting. Again, it was about how do the right brands actually create educational tools for children, and that teachers could use in the classroom. So, for example, it might be Sydney Water, teaching them how to be water wise and things like that. So that was very interesting. I then kind of ran my own marketing consultancy. So I would outsource marketing managers into businesses, SMEs. And I really liked that, except that doing that on my own, the high and the low, it came to a point where I was like, I think for me, I'd rather be into an organisation again. Now, before that, even that thought came into my head, I actually saw someone present from NIDA Corporate Training at a network event. And I was totally blown away. I didn't know that NIDA actually did corporate training. I loved the exercises. It was so much so I wrote to the tutor, the head of department, and I told the CEO when I next saw her, I love what you did. That was an amazing product. I was so blown away. Literally a few months down the track, my role was advertised. And so I applied with a very passionate kind of cover letter that explained that I'd experienced it and I loved it. And it would be a pleasure to work back in this world where we help people be better presenters and communicators. And anyway, I got the role 2 years ago. I've been in the role now and it's fantastic.
Thank you for sharing that. I love listening to people share their journey because I keep hearing one word pop up during it.
Yeah.
Love. I love this. I didn't love that. Love this. Do you know what I mean? And it shapes the course of your journey. You lean into something new, you love it, you build on it in your next phase. And it's really interesting. You talk about Chapman and Leicester, the marketing store. My roots are in promotional marketing. And even though it was seen, below the line marketing seen as really the poor cousin of advertising, I think the breadth that you get to experience in those below the line marketing agencies, you know, the breadth of skills you use, the fact that it is focused 100% on results and you're answerable for those, I think it sets you up to be quite versatile moving forward.
I used to also notice that actually people who came from that background and worked in account service were such incredible project managers, more so than I thought the ones were from advertising.
Yeah.
In advertising, you kind of sit back a bit more and you're led by, strategists and, very senior creative directors and lots and lots and lots of egos. And more often than not, you're managing egos. I didn't find that in sales promotion. I found you were the real point. Like, you had to make things happen. You had to make them on time. It was just, there was just more, you just had to be more on your game. And I found those skills when I'd hire people, if they'd been from that background, they were excellent.
Yeah. And I've found very hard to move from below the line to above the line without feeling like you're just in a box and unable to use those many skills.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. You're kind of like what they used to, what did they call the bag handler or something, like you'd go,
Courier.
the suit. Or the suit. And I hated that term. It was as if you were good for nothing other than what you were wearing to a meeting,
Yep.
So
yeah,
it was a very good, and it was really interesting because I just had no idea that I love creativity. I had no idea. The two and two didn't go together. And it wasn't until I actually worked in a creative environment where I was like, oh, business and creativity. Yes, I love this. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah. So it's not always been a thread, at Youth Off the Streets. There's not creativity as much, but it has been a thread through a lot of the rest of my career.
Yeah. And also strategy. Like you didn't often have a strategic planner sitting there in the agency.
No.
So you were responsible for ensuring strategy aligned. So
yeah.
Now, before we move on to your work in NIDA, which I'm really keen to get into, I just want to learn a little bit more. I know you're doing some mentoring work through Future Women. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So I've kind of mentored on and off for years. I did some through the local council where I mentored young women in high school from very lower socioeconomic backgrounds to help them complete a project, and that was really fulfilling. Future Women, I've mentored with them. I've also mentored people, off to the side, just people who've come to me. I often will mentor young women in their careers. It's just something I really enjoy doing, especially for women. I love seeing potential and letting them know that I've made mistakes and that it's okay to make mistakes. But, if I can just share some of the, stories of what I've done and what I would do better or what's really worked for me in a non-judgmental, no expectations way. And if someone can take one of those things with them, then I think that's really great. I love that. Yeah, it's something I really like to do. I've just signed myself up to mentor for some other people as well. So, I like it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know, like, through your work with Future Women, I imagine as well, because you're still part of the Marketing Academy community, alumni. What patterns are you seeing in the next generation of leaders through those organisations? Are there any that stand out?
I think they are more easily willing to be vulnerable. I think I felt like I grew up in a generation of, I don't know things, but I'm going to keep quiet. I don't want to look stupid. Whereas I think people are like putting their hands up and saying, actually, I don't understand that. Or actually, I question that. Or actually, I don't know why we're doing that. I feel like I was taught, rightly or wrongly, to just suck it up. And I think it's wonderful. I encourage my team, ask questions. Don't say it's a stupid question. Just ask it anyway, because there's probably someone else who also wants to ask it but doesn't have the guts. And I also think, yeah, people are more in touch with emotions and being vulnerable and being open and being honest and being true to who they are.
Mm.
I have come across some very, very, very senior leaders who are just authentically themselves. Now, I don't remember a time when I was coming through my career when that was kind of praised. It was almost like, you know, especially if you're working around a lot of men. It was kind of like, you know, didn't want to be emotional, you know, you needed to kind of act like one of the men, I guess, is what I mean. But yeah, I think they've kind of learning from our mistakes I feel like I'm kind of only learning in the last 10 years of my career. And it's great to see.
It's so interesting to see that because, I mean, you see it when you see someone speaking or, you know, sharing something, when people share their mistakes, which you
Yeah.
said, you know, that before, that wasn't so, especially as a woman, I think.
Yeah.
You didn't
Yeah.
have that luxury because you had to hold yourself at a certain level to be seen as credible.
No one told me about the mistakes they made. None of my kind of immediate female bosses, nor men, but let's just focus on the women. And so I just thought you had to be
Mm.
perfect. And I just thought I would never be perfect. And so I was always trying to reach for something that was totally unattainable, which actually wasn't real, except that no one said, hey, you know, it's okay. It's like when I presented and I stuffed up, no one kind of pulled me aside and went, it's okay.
Mm.
Like, how do we help you? It was just shoved under a carpet. I just would never do that to someone like these days.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's the difference. It was kind of that just kind of, you know, get on with it, that kind of old school, like shove it under the carpet and, you know, dust yourself off and keep on going. But those moments actually really can make a big difference. If you're a sensitive person too, right? They can really impact you in ways that aren't great. And I think these days, you know, I recently said to my team, hey, you can take risks because I'm giving you permission to make mistakes. However, you must take accountability for your mistakes and you must learn from them. So as long as you do that, mistakes are okay. And, you know, I think that's the kind of thing we've got to be okay with is that we don't feel like huge failures or that we're letting everyone down because we made a mistake. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
What happened? What could we have all done
And then
better?
everybody learns from it. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
vulnerability as to how you're feeling, you know, I don't know how many times in recent times I've seen people who show up to something and when they announce it, they're actually nervous. I've had guests on this podcast who are like you would not think it of them, and they've come and said, "I'm actually quite nervous about this," and yeah, I don't know. It changes the energy. It's you know they are being authentic, and you respond to it, right?
Well, we get a lot of that in our training, especially we get a lot of very, very senior people doing our coaching. They do it because they want it to be private, and you'd be shocked at who these people are. They're chairpersons, they're CEOs. They don't want anyone knowing that actually they are petrified to present at maybe a specific meeting or a specific AGM or whatever that might be. And yeah, you kind of go, oh, they're normal.
Mm,
And right, and they're like me. They get nervous at, you know, presenting because it is really nerve-wracking. It doesn't matter who you are. I mean, you know, how many people say, "Oh yeah, I'm not bothered when I present." And you kind of go, "Really? Is there something wrong with you?"
yeah, and also,
Because it's nerve-wracking. It's a lot on stake. It's, you know,
well, what is it? People say they like. Is it something like 90% of people say they would rather die than speak publicly?
yes, it's a real thing. It's a real thing. And so, you know, we have no judgment here. We expect that you're going to be
Yeah,
nervous. And that's why we teach you techniques to mitigate that. You're never going to get over that fear. It's how you manage it in the moment that's most important.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So tell us about NIDA and what you're doing in the corporate department.
So, about 30 years ago, someone had a brilliant idea that the skills that we teach our performing artists were perfect to teach the corporate world and business people. And it comes from the fact that communication is made up of three parts. So it's the words you say, it's your voice and how you project, and then it's your body. And we teach here all day, every day, about how to use your voice and use your body. So 30 years on, we've now got a business unit that is set up to help fund NIDA. So all of the money we make goes back in to support the school and to support the arts, which is a really, really wonderful thing that we remind ourselves every day, that we are so blessed to be able to do that. At the same time, on the other hand, we get to help make people like even better versions of themselves as communicators and presenters or facilitators or storytellers. And we also know that, they take that back to their workplace and they can affect change in their workplace, which I love, being a commercial-minded person. So, like, if you think about that, we help people, businesses, we help NIDA and the arts. I can't actually imagine anything better than those four, coming to work every day and actually knowing that you're affecting those four things. So we have two kind of areas. We've got public courses that anyone can just go in and sign up to. And they're around communication, presentation. We've got an incredible course called Influential Women, which is a very small cohort over 2 days, and it covers communication and presentation. And it's kind of tackles some of the challenges that women may face in their work environments, and teaches them how to have more gravitas and presence. And we do then a whole heap of specialised courses around facilitation and storytelling and executive voice, which might be specifically if you want to focus on that area. Then we have a whole other area which the majority of our team kind of work on, which is customised, which is where hundreds of organisations come to us and go, this is our communication challenge. It might be we have players on a field of a sports team and they're not communicating together correctly. Can you help us with that? It might be presenting for media. We've got a team of people who are starting to go out to media. We want to make sure that they know what their body and voice says when they're in those positions. We have customer service clients, like in high-end fashion and in hospitality, who want their frontline staff to actually know how to deal with difficult customers and how to be the best face for their organisation possible. We do manager to leader programs. We do subject matter expert, kind of working with people who are very, very smart but haven't quite mastered how to do a presentation to an audience that aren't as smart as they are or as knowledgeable in their area. Oh gosh, we do lots. So that is a really huge part of what we do, and it feels a little bit hidden because we're answering briefs every day. But we work. We've got an organisation coming in next week. Their whole team of 220 are coming into NIDA for a whole day. Wow. So that they can all speak the same language. So they're going through a strategy session with them. And then they're coming in here and learning about how to better communicate both internally and externally to customers, how to present better, how to pitch better, how to negotiate. I find that's incredible because I know that's going to influence their organisation tenfold.
Absolutely. That's huge. Like getting 220 people together and adopting it as this is how we communicate together. This is the standard.
Yeah. Well, it helps culturally too. So together they kind of, because, communication affects everything. Every single thing. The best idea, if you can't communicate it properly, forget about it. You can have the best relationship, but if you can't communicate things that have gone wrong and how you're unhappy, it's probably not going to last down the track. It's the undercurrent of every single relationship we have. And these tools are not just good for business, they are good personally as well. So yeah, I feel like I really admire an organisation that goes all in and says, yeah, we're gonna do this for culture, for business performance, for our customers, everything. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Before we dive back in, a quick word from me. If you're enjoying this conversation, you might want to know that I work with leaders and organisations on how purpose becomes a powerful driver of trust, performance and resilience. I speak at leadership conferences and company events about how purpose shows up where it matters most, in leadership, in culture and in strategy, helping organisations grow with clarity and confidence in a changing world. You can find out more at my website, carolynbutler-madden.com. Now, back to the episode. And especially at a time where businesses and organizations have to adapt, have to change, have to be agile.
Yeah.
And they need to move, the whole organization and all of their internal stakeholders and all stakeholders really
Yeah.
with them. That communication becomes so important. And I want to go back to the three parts you talked about: words, voice, body.
Yeah.
It's presence is a big thing.
Yeah. Yes.
So, and I'm guessing that this is run by people that train actors.
Yeah. So we've got probably on hand roughly 50 casual tutors at any one time. They have a performing arts background, so they've been trained either as actors or directors, so they fundamentally understand the importance of the body and the voice in how it is that you turn up. They have also been tutors and trainers within the corporate world, because you can't just take someone straight from acting and put them into a boardroom, or someone who expects you to understand, their business. So our tutors have been doing this for a very long time. But they don't need to understand the nuance of your business. They need to understand the nuance of how it is that you're talking about your business,
Yep.
or you're talking about your change management, or you're talking about whatever those things are. So they understand the corporate environment and high stakes and what's at play with different, levels of power and things like that. But really fundamentally, at the end of the day, this applies to every single organisation. And it's interesting that you talk about change management. I facilitated a panel probably 2 years ago and the Honourable Victor Dominello was on it. He is amazing because he's always customer first. And we were talking about AI.
Who is the Honourable Victor Dominello?
He used to be New South Wales Minister for Customer Service and Digital. And
okay.
So he was very instrumental in bringing in Service New South Wales and making that digital. We sat on that panel and talked about technology and the rate in which it's moving. But the undercurrent of the conversation was, if you can't explain to your staff or you can't explain to your customers why you're using technology or what effect it has on their roles, then the technology becomes scary, or you don't use it, or you don't use it properly. So we tend to love kind of using digital platforms, and I understand we've got a lot here at NIDA as well, but if you can't communicate that change, there's a problem. And either people won't take it up, people will be fearful, people will use it wrong, and that has a business, effect, which is not necessarily great. So communication is it's integral. But everyone thinks they can already communicate. That's the problem, because we do it every day.
Yeah, but as you say, there are so many different parts to it. And what you've just talked about there is the spoken word. But when you talk about voice and body, so what do actors understand about presence that leaders might not understand? Some leaders might not understand.
Presence is, I think sometimes people think, not all, but sometimes people think you have to be louder and bigger to make, people see you or feel you or know, where you sit in the organisation. Actors are not taught that. There's kind of a neutrality that they're taught before they go into a character, which is calmness. It's sitting upright. It's actually giving nothing away by your body, It's letting your words be the thing that people will listen to, versus watching you slouch or watching you feel like you've got your hands up and you know what you're talking about, because that's what they'll pay attention to, not the words. So if the words are important, you don't want your voice and your body to tell a different story.
And there are so many different types of communicators. I think of Obama as one of the most amazing, and he has that, as you talk about, that calm presence, patience.
He has perfected the pause to a point. In his speeches, he uses just space to allow people to take in what he said, because you can speak faster than people can listen and comprehend. So it allows people time to understand what you're saying. it also kind of weirdly commands a bit of power because everyone's kind of hanging on what you're saying. So they stop and they listen. But it does have a calming effect. It makes you feel like that person is trustworthy, that they know what they're doing. They're not rushing. They're not trying to prove something. So it's all the little things that these techniques say without saying it. And it's what comes across.
And it's shades of colour, isn't it? It's like, the humour just in the way he cocks his head and brilliant.
Yeah, he is amazing, and he has been taught by a voice coach, is my understanding. So, and a very good one in overseas. But
not surprising.
Yeah, no, he's smart. He knows that actually that's a really like the leaders that work with us. They know the importance of what that if you present well, you present the company well, not just yourself.
I guess what you're saying is, they're aware of the story. They're telling not just in words, but through their body, their language, their tone and their energy.
100%. It's, if you say something to someone and you're like, oh, we've got this covered, it's all fine. Those words in themselves say one thing, but your body and my pace of speaking, it says a totally different thing.
I'm freaked out if you say it like that.
So you didn't listen to the words, you watched my body and my voice and chose to pay attention to that. So that's the part of communication that we really focus on.
Or you don't believe it. You hear the words, but you don't believe it.
That's right. But you might have spent hours putting that speech together, and you really genuinely do want people to believe you, but, you haven't mastered your body and your voice to be able to connect, because maybe inside you are nervous. Maybe you don't really know, but if you're presenting, you have to let people believe that you do. So it's fascinating. It's a really interesting. And look, I get people come up to me all the time. Oh, I did your course 5 years ago. I love it. I still love it. I still recommend it to people. So there's something about what we do that really impacts people and leaves a really lasting impression.
And it's so important. I think, I never ever thought I would be a public speaker. I've always, coming from an agency background, I've always been behind, the brands or whatever, and never had any interest in stepping on a stage. And yet when I did the pivot from marketing agency to this work and understood the gap, huge gap in understanding, it was like, well, people need to be educated, and started doing it one-to-one, one to teams, and then, eventually stepped on a stage. Oh my God, I think about the first couple of times I was awful. Awful. I cringe when I think about it. I had no training.
No.
I've done lots of presentations to clients, but it's different.
Yeah, it is very stressful walking out and seeing everyone going, okay, what do you got? That's what they're kind of saying. I tell you, the most stressed I've ever been presenting was within my first week. I was asked to do, I think it was an International Women's Day at the Swans, and with a panel, and I got coached by one of, my team. But then they all sat in the front row and watched me, and I was thinking, when they say, oh, we're not judging you, and I was like, but they actually are. That's their job. And I was the most nervous I've ever been, because I was like, I'm representing NIDA. I'm representing NIDA Corporate Training. I haven't actually done a whole heap of training yet myself. Yeah, it was a really stressful moment. They were very kind to me.
That would be incredibly stressful. But what I was going to say is, the next phase of that for me was realizing it wasn't about me.
Yes. Yeah.
It was about that sort of understanding that I was trying to get out there. And for a while, that sort of drove me, and it did take me to another level because it was authentic, right? Yeah. So, when I'm up on stage speaking, I'm looking at people to see if they're understanding what I'm saying, and I'm reinforcing things or whatever. But even then, so a lot of people, I think, well, if you have purpose, then you've got that authenticity. But through my speaking career, I've learnt that even that's not enough. You need that you don't need, but that stagecraft, that presence, all of those things that you teach,
Yeah.
power up that message.
Yeah, so I've done about 7 of our courses, but every time I start one, I'm nervous again and I forget. And then at the end, I'm like, that's right, I remember that technique now. Like it's not one and done either. You do need to keep working on it. If you're lucky that you can continually present, and some roles do it, then you're constantly practicing on the job. But if it's not often that you're presenting, it is important to just have, that reminders of those kind of techniques that manage your nerves, remind you of how to hold your body. I used to speak really fast, so it was always, I had to really consider slowing down. It's an ongoing journey. It's an ongoing journey for everyone, including me.
So can you share an example, and it can be anonymous, of a leader or a team who you've seen transform through this work?
Oh, gosh, there's so many. Look, what often I can give like lots of little anecdotes. Like we've had people who've actually come to us confidentially and gone, I'm actually applying for a very, very, very senior role. Can you help me in my interview? I've been told that, I went for this job a couple of years ago. I didn't get it. The feedback was, yeah, it was great, but the interview wasn't so great. So we've coached them and then we've had a couple of people get roles. We actually helped real estate group who, right, by nature, you would think they're fantastic communicators. But we actually got them to think about their communication. So one of the real estate agents was trying to win over being the vendor for a divorced couple or a divorcing couple. And so he started with, I'm so sorry, that you're going through this. And the tutor was like, well, actually, we don't know that, right? We don't know that they're sorry. Maybe they're thrilled that this is happening and they don't want to get rid of the house. You don't know that. You don't have to play at that. You're there to sell their house and get them the best price. So rethink. And so this person did that and then went out because he'd brought in a real life scenario, went out and did it and won it. Now, you can imagine for a real estate company, that's direct ROI. So even a group of people who by their nature are seen as good communicators can still work on how it is that they listen, how they connect, and do they connect in the right way. So yeah, we do see it a lot. We see a lot of people come through the training, and I'm talking more on a personal level because it's only when you get lots of people doing it together that you can see it. But I've had people who are crying at the start of a training, and at the end they get up and they present in front of everyone. Everyone's almost crying themselves.
Oh, that must be so satisfying.
It really is the most beautiful thing to watch because like we're saying, how fearful people are presenting, but they felt so safe that they could do it within that environment. And here's a bunch of strangers cheering them on, all wishing them the best. It was really great. So, yeah, I'm really interested in this company who's training their whole team. I think they're going to, there is no doubt. And they're doing it because quite a few years ago they did the training and they saw impact on their culture.
That will be a fascinating case study.
Yeah,
like over a period of time as well,
yes,
to actually track what impact that has. That's so interesting.
We've also got a sales team that we're about to train, so media sales, and they have gotten into the habit of talking the data. And what's happening is if you talk in media sales about data, really all you are doing is comparing data to data, and there's no reason why, an agency would choose you over somewhere or a brand would choose you over something else. Someone new has come on in and they're like, no, we actually have a very, very, very good story about why you would choose us. They've got a legitimate, real story. So they're crafting that story, and then 40 of their staff are going through presentation and storytelling training. So how to present this story to their clients, but also how to embed and thread either personal stories, business stories, or other stories in the way they communicate with their customers. So again, that's going to be a really interesting impact to see as well.
Yeah, and the power of storytelling is just incredible. Even little stories. I still think it is largely untapped within organisations as a way of people understanding, who that organisation is, what behaviours they value.
Yeah.
You can talk about it and point to the values on the wall, but nothing beats someone in the organisation sharing a story of what happened when this person was, faced with this challenge and this is how they behaved. And that builds trust more than
Yeah.
this is what we stand for.
And legitimacy.
Yeah.
Legitimacy of, oh, I see. I can see that in real
Evidence.
time. Yeah, context, all of those kind of things. I love context. Like I've always, again, upon reflection, looked back at me. Even when I was at uni, I was always like, hang on, how does this relate in the real world? Like I was always needing case studies and for me to connect it, to go, what is the theory? Otherwise, it's just words. Show me something where it's actually done and it's actually come to life. And then it embeds in my memory, but it also makes me believe it.
So that's a great segue to my next question. And I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer this with your NIDA hat or with your Terri with all your world experience hat on. What do you think is the difference between performing leadership and embodying it?
I think performing means no room for error, don't admit to mistakes, constantly go ask on, kind of knows everything. When they don't know everything, they don't admit it. I think, and that's the leadership I thought was real when I was younger.
Performative.
Performative, yeah. It's like I'm acting as the senior. I'm the one who knows everything. You come to me and you'll ask questions. But it's what I've learned over time is the opposite of that is, yes, I'm the leader, but I'm not necessarily the expert in X, and that's you, right? And you're going to come to me and I'm going to learn and you're going to learn from me and I'm going to listen to you. And in actual fact, at this, I'm going to get you to present because you know more than me. But I always love that cartoon where it's like someone's in a chariot and they're kind of whipping their team, right? And that's the traditional sense of a leader from all many, many, many years ago. And then what it is now is that kind of we all walk together and, we all look around and I'll lean on you for this and you'll lean on me for that. And I'll admit I don't know this and they'll admit that I've got this. And we kind of, you kind of lead from the front. I think that's integral. I think, it's that kind of thing, we've got this thing, a principle in our team, which is we, not I. It sounds very obvious. I can't do my job without all my team. This person can't do their job without me and the rest of the team. So we are all together in this. Mistakes can be made. Yeah, maybe you did a lot of it, but there's probably some other things we could have done better. So we admit to mistakes together. We admit to wins together. I think that's leadership when it's treated like that.
Yeah, being vulnerable.
Mm.
What do you think if communication is misaligned with purpose? What's the impact? So, and as a leader comes to you and wants to, communicate something, but and you might not know this, but what do you think is the impact if there's not that real alignment and it is just performative, if you like?
I think what will happen is what we were talking about earlier is the disconnect will cause confusion. So they'll be like, they're saying this and they're wanting us to hear that, but I don't get the sense from this person that they truly embody it, believe it, or even want to do it. And so what will happen is they'll follow the evidence of what they're feeling that person is coming across as, not the words. And I think, words like disingenuous or performative or, you talk about this in purpose, right? When this whole idea of, are you just greenwashing? Are you just doing it because the board said we have to tick that box? Everyone feels that, versus living it, breathing it, saying it, doing it, demonstrating it, expecting everyone else to say, do, demonstrate. It's you just see straight through it. You just don't believe it.
I remember several years ago running a purpose workshop for C-suite executives of a big corporate company. Let's put them in the comms space to keep it broad. And it had been the result of a merger and new executive team coming together. and we did a full day workshop I co-facilitated with somebody else. And we'd done a lot of exercises and everything, and then the CEO was talking, and he talked about a lot of all the things you would expect. And then there was this moment, and the purpose. I won't say exactly what it was, but it was around this idea of meaningful connections and relationships. And he told this story of a little boy, and I think he said it was a friend of his, and a father who was always busy and taking phone calls on his phone, business, 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 and all that little boy wanted was some of his father's attention. And the way he shared that story, and I don't think he'd planned to do it, like it certainly hadn't come up in our planning. You could have heard a pin drop. And that was the moment that the room believed what they were doing.
Right. Yeah.
That one story. And I think, that alignment, it comes from, a belief, a narrative, and stories are the bridge to other people recognizing that. So it's interesting, isn't it?
And it's interesting because, we teach storytelling in the business context, but NIDA is actually, the home of the world's greatest storytellers, not just performing artists, but directors or people who tell stories through costume or props. So, yeah, we better than anyone understand the power of stories. It's about being comfortable with storytelling within business. Now, a lot of people are, but then there are a lot of subsection who aren't naturally like that. So maybe people who are more financial or digital or, in that kind of tech world. But it's the power of it, like you just explained, can really connect people just instantly. It's fascinating.
Yeah, that's the trust piece.
Yeah. Yep.
So I'd love to try and give our listeners a little practical takeaway. So for those people listening who think I'm not a natural communicator, they are leaders or influence, senior people in their organizations. They think they're not a natural communicator. What is one shift they could make immediately?
People think that communication is talking. But the best piece of advice for a really good communicator is to stop and listen and really listen to what someone is telling you. And there's that whole thing of when someone's talking to you and you're going, yeah, very good, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say back to you. And we do some techniques that stop you doing that make you actually just throw everything away and listen to what they're saying. And the more you can do that, the more they feel heard, and the more that communication connection actually happens. So we think it's talking, but it's actually a lot of it can be listening really well.
Love that. And I reckon everybody can relate to that because we have all sat in meetings where people are just waiting to have their say and, they're not focusing on the depth of what the person who's talking is saying because they're already trying to shape the world would be such a different place, right?
I know. And people say things and you think, where did that come from? That's not what we were talking about, because they're in their head and they want to be heard or they want to seem smart, whatever the reasons are. And sometimes it's talking less, it's being communicated with, I think, those people who are really good listeners and you want to talk to them. And so it's just about, really tapping into what someone is saying to you rather than just talking.
Love it. Terri, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your story and what you're doing today at NIDA. Really, really interesting. I wasn't aware that NIDA did this. I'm sure there are a lot of people who aren't. So hopefully our listeners, what's the best way for our listeners to get in touch?
So our website is Corporate NIDA. You can put that into search and we've got details on there. You can drop us a note, phone number, give us a call. That's the best way. Our team, are really responsive. So, and we can just have a chat. We love that. Just talk to us about what your challenges are and let's see if we can help.
Yeah, we'll add that to the show notes.
Yes.
I'd love you to close out the episode with sharing, if through the work you're doing today, Terri's dream, like if you could achieve your greatest dream, what might change over the next 5 years?
So this isn't in our strategy, but this would be something that would be amazing to do. I would love to see the techniques that we teach be taught to high school students. And I think if you also taught the teachers, and we're building really strong communication techniques from an age where they can then embed them better, because sometimes we're teaching people who've got so many old habits. But you imagine how that will affect their personal, like interactions with parents and teachers, with potential partners, but of course in their work life. And you cultivate, a generation of really excellent communicators. And I think because communication is so integral to so much that we do, that would just be amazing, amazing. I don't know why they don't teach it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the For Love and Money podcast. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into the purpose movement, visit us at thecauseeffect.com.au. And remember, doing good is good for business. So if you're not doing good, then what are you doing?